So there's this basketball player. She's kind of a big deal.
On cue, Sue Bird getting a little high screen.
Bird launches from way out there from her hometown.
Left Sue for the dagger, and she hits it. Seattle by 10.
Sue Bird has won a lot of championships. 2 with the University of Connecticut, 4 WNBA titles, 5 Olympic gold medals. Sue grew up on Long Island. There was one athlete she looked up to more than all others.
My role model 100% was my older sister. She's 5 years older. Here I am, like a kindergartner, watching my 5th grade sister try out all these different sports. And as we advanced through it, making the middle school teams and making the high school teams, I wasn't scared because I got to see her do it. So that's my role model, my sister Jen. If I was to give you an answer based on athletes on TV or those that I got to watch, it was all men. They were all guys. I really hadn't seen female athletes play in person or on TV for that matter. Every now and then you might catch like an NCAA Final Four game or something like that, but it just wasn't, so all my answers would have been guys.
That all changed on April 13th, 1996. Sue was 15, and the U.S. women's basketball team was playing an exhibition game in Philadelphia.
Which isn't like around the block from New York by any means, but I think at that point it was probably the closest that they were going to get to us.
Sue's coach, Jill, was the one who suggested they take the trip.
And so we got in her car and she drove us to Philadelphia, and the game was at the Palestra, which is, a storied arena in our country, especially on the East Coast. So it was super cool to just be in that building with all the history.
The Palestra was built in 1927, and it's sometimes called the Cathedral of College Basketball. Sue and her teammates walked around and checked out the arena, and then they settled into their seats to watch the game. Sue was amazed by the talent and athleticism on the floor. She'd never seen women play basketball this well.
Immediately, my eyes were drawn to Jen Azzi, because that was my see it, be it moment.
Jennifer Azzi was a point guard, so was Sue. They both have long brown hair, and they're about the same height. Jen is 5'8", Sue is 5'9".
I saw somebody who looked like me, who was out there, doing things that I hope to do one day just to be successful on the court. And it was kind of like, okay, if Jen Azzi can do it, maybe one day I could.
But Sue didn't go home that night and start dreaming of winning Olympic gold medals.
That's just not my personality, because I think I was just like every teenage girl, like my confidence wasn't that high. I wasn't walking home like, hey mom, by the way, I'm going to be an Olympian. It wasn't like that at all, but I registered it. The moment was definitely like registered.
4 months later, Sue watched on TV as the U.S. won an Olympic gold medal.
Sometimes you need things to happen to you have to see it in order to understand what's possible.
But here's the thing. The 1996 Olympics didn't just show young girls like Sue what was possible. Those games changed the future of women's sports.
I don't think there's a WNBA without the 96 Olympics. Without a WNBA, without professional sports in the U.S., I'm not sitting here. Who knows what I'm doing, but I'm not sitting here talking about these things. Seriously, I really believe that.
From Dear Media and Together, I'm Michelle Kwan. This is Summer of Gold. This is episode 1, See It, Be It. The story of the Summer of Gold begins with women like Mollyanity. Molly grew up in the late 70s and early 80s, and she loved watching sports with her grandfather. He was a Pittsburgh Pirates fan and a college football referee.
So my earliest memories of watching sport were very much woven into my relationship with my grandfather, and they all would have been men's professional and college sports.
Molly remembers watching women's sports on TV during the Olympics. But other than that,
soccer, nowhere, not at all. Softball, nowhere to be found. For those real formative years, I don't remember seeing women's sports on TV much at all.
Molly's grandfather always told her she could be anything she wanted when she grew up. And pretty early on, Molly decided to become a sports writer.
I just assumed in a really, beautifully naive way that I was going to be in sports. I remember going to Pittsburgh Pirates games, and my grandfather had become friends with the general manager of the Pirates, and we'd go sit in his box. And I saw all the reporters, and it never crossed my little mind that there were no women there.
Molly lived in Athens, Ohio, and in the winter of 1986, the biggest team in town wasn't the Ohio University men's basketball team. It was the women's basketball team.
Their games were right before the men's games. So a lot of times, the second half would be highly attended because people were coming in for the men's game. But this season, people were going early and watching and staying for the whole thing. And my 12-year-old tears might spring back here, but they lost to the University of Illinois in the first round of the NCAA tournament, which Ohio University hosted. And it was like by a bucket, like 1 or 2 points. It was a super close game. And little Molly was devastated.
Molly still remembers the names and jersey numbers of the women who played for that team.
It still really didn't dawn on me that this was an anomaly, because in our community then it was a big deal that year. And it probably didn't hit me until about high school that it is harder for women to break into the sports business, the sports media business. I didn't have a plan B. I mean, that's what I was going to do. And, I had an internship after college that was in news, and I stuck around after my shift was finished and went into the sports department. And there was one other female writer, and she took me under her wing, and that was it. I just needed that one person, and you see it, and hey, I can do this.
That summer, Molly was watching on TV as the Summer Olympics focused the spotlight on women's sports.
Basketball, soccer, softball, gymnastics.
For the first time, more than 15,000 reporters had been credentialed to cover the games.
This group was up to the challenge. They were ready for the cameras, they were ready for the microphones, and they were women with charisma.
Softball and women's soccer were making their Olympic debuts, and women's basketball was riding a wave of publicity from winning 52 games in a row in the lead up to the games.
Everyone was calling them the women's dream team because they were just doing this in such a dominating fashion.
During the opening ceremonies, announcers considered the possibility that American women might win more gold medals than American men.
Well, reporters for 100 years have only talked mostly of men's accomplishments in sport, and it's the women's time here in Atlanta. At least that is...
Around the world, 9 out of 10 television viewers tuned in at least once. And with the games being held on home soil where Americans could watch in prime time, NBC set ratings records with an average of 33 million people watching every night.
That's crazy. I mean, the gymnastics team finals, that was 42 million people watching those young women do what they did. And they didn't disappoint. They stepped right up and stuck the landing on one leg, and all the drama, all the media spectacle. It was amazing.
I was watching that night too. I was 16 years old. I just won my first figure skating world championship. I'd spent every second, every minute, every hour of the previous 9 years dreaming about competing in the Winter Olympics. My first opportunity was less than 2 years away. But I sometimes joke that if I wasn't a figure skater, I would have been a gymnast. I was in front of my TV for what would turn out to be the most memorable moment of those games. Carrie Strug was the last U.S. gymnast to perform on the team's last event of the night, the vault.
So Carrie Strug, it is up to her. If she can score...
All she needed to do was stick a landing and they win it. And so this first vault happens and she bites it, and just like, boom.
Oh!
Shocked. Just shocked. And she's limping back, and you see the coaches and, all the drama built by the commentators. And she was clearly hurt.
The seconds ticked by, almost in slow motion, while the TV announcers reminded us that a gold medal was on the line. Carrie limped back to the start, testing her ankle.
God, it was gut-wrenching because it was like, there it goes. That's it. And then she just gets up and does it again and nails it.
Molly and her roommate were watching together.
I have goosebumps now talking about it. I remember the two of us sitting in that apartment and we cried. We just jumped up in the air and tears streaming down our face. I mean, that is just an iconic sports moment. Not, women's sports moment, not Olympic sports moment. That is an iconic sports moment.
You might have seen some of the memes that have been going around lately, criticizing the decision to allow Carrie to vault on an injured ankle. But very few people were talking about that back in 1996. That moment propelled Carrie Strug to instant stardom. In the weeks and months after the games, you couldn't turn on the TV without seeing her. She was on Jay Leno.
Hey, how is your leg? Is it okay?
Well, it's doing much better. I've undergone a lot of physical therapy.
Yeah.
And Rosie O'Donnell.
Well, in gymnastics, you hear a lot of pops and cracks, and you just deal with them,
Whatever.
She even had a cameo in Beverly Hills 90210.
What does it take to get a Class U1 around here? What, do you have to win a gold medal or something?
Doesn't hurt.
So that really changed our lives like that.
Dominique Moceanu was 14 years old, the youngest member of that U.S. women's gymnastics team.
We were instantly famous. We were instantly an attraction. And we all had agents all of a sudden. We got invited to the White House. And I remember going home and my house being crowded full with balloons and U.S. Postal boxes filled up to like the ceiling of people asking me to marry them.
Carrie Strug enrolled at UCLA and scheduled performances for the weekends. The rest of the team set off on a victory tour, crisscrossing the country on a bus.
We felt like rock stars. I mean, there was a crowd of fans outside of every single stop. We had fans coming into our hotels that we didn't even know. They would wait for us. People asking you to sign all over their body parts. Sign here, sign my butt, sign this mannequin head, sign this t-shirt, sign the Wheaties box. And it was just like everywhere we went, it was like we were mobbed.
But Mollyanity says the excitement around the women's gymnastics team was just the beginning.
Suddenly, I was being asked to go cover high school girls, go cover the volleyball team, go cover the soccer team, right that fall immediately.
In October, a women's professional basketball league called the ABL played its first game. The following summer, the WNBA began play.
It was so exciting. There were all of a sudden these opportunities. And, for me, it was one of the coolest things ever.
And for the first time, the media was not only paying attention, they were investing in women's sports.
Right away, Sports Illustrated launched Sports Illustrated Women's Sport. Cheryl Swoops was on the cover of one, and she was pregnant. And the second one was Mia Hamm. And as a young sports journalist, I flipped over that.
But the thing is, this wasn't just about sports. This was a massive cultural moment for women. Period. I'm going to introduce you to another woman whose worldview was changed by the Summer of Gold. Her name is Jessica Robertson. She's the Chief Content Officer for Together, and I've been told that she came up with the idea for this podcast.
That rumor is true. This project was my idea.
Jessica grew up in a small town in Kentucky.
Basketball is quite a religion in Kentucky, so I grew up with that.
She played basketball and softball, but sports weren't the only things on her mind.
I've always had this sort of feminist bent.
Jessica was in 5th grade, and her school was running a canned food drive. They held one every year.
And I was in Mrs. Brown's math class, and she announced that she needed 2 strong boys to carry these canned goods to the gym. And I was so offended because I was like, 1, I'm probably one of the best athletes in this class. 2, what do you mean boys? I can do this. I can do this. So I protested. I said something to her, and then I wrote a petition. We had just learned about petitions. I wrote a petition and had every girl in my class sign it, saying it was discriminatory and girls should be allowed to do it too.
After that, Mrs. Brown was careful to always ask for 2 strong volunteers to carry the cans. Fast forward to the summer of 1996. Jessica was 13 years old when the Olympic torch was lit in Atlanta, and she was ready.
I had a local TV guide channel booklet, and I would look up the games that were going to be broadcast and highlight them or circle them in pen.
Jessica remembers sitting on the living room floor, leaning up against her mom's hunter green couch, watching those games.
Anytime the women's soccer team or gymnastics team or softball team or basketball team, anytime any one of those teams played, I was sitting 2 feet away from the TV, soaking it in. And what I saw were incredible women that all looked differently, expressed differently, played differently, and I could be any one of them. I remember going to my grandfather's house and telling him that I was going to be an Olympic softball player. And he was like, okay, you can do that. Yes, you can be an Olympic softball player. But I had never known that as a possibility until that summer.
Jessica didn't grow up to be an Olympic softball player, but still, the things she saw that summer stuck with her.
It felt big to me as a young girl. A lot of these women were on magazine covers. I remember seeing Mia Hamm in commercials. I'm seeing stories and I'm hearing experiences reflected back to me that I can identify with. I can feel that. And it was really inspiring.
But Jessica wasn't just watching women take center stage in sports. It was happening in pop culture and music too. And Jessica had always been obsessed with music.
If I wasn't on a basketball court or a softball field, you would find me in the floor of my bedroom with my headphones on, listening to music. When I was really young, my mom, if my sister and I were good, when we ran our errands on a Saturday, would allow us to buy a new cassette tape or a single because it was cheap.
Jessica must have been very good because she got to buy a lot of singles. By the time the 96 Olympics rolled around, she had upgraded to CDs. She was listening to a little bit of everything.
A lot of hip hop. I loved Mariah Carey, Whitney Houston, Aaliyah was coming out. I was a Spice Girls fan. I loved the Fugees. Lauryn Hill to me was like a reckoning in so many ways.
Killing Me Softly was like the anthem of my school.
That's Sue Bird again.
I mean, who doesn't love Lauryn Hill? Like an amazingly gorgeous voice. And that whole album is like one of my favorites.
Tracy Chapman had just come out with a new album. Throw Paula Cole in there.
That's Mollyanity again.
It just felt so euphoric. It really did. You know, I mean, you got the women kicking ass in Atlanta, and you turn on the radio, and it just still is this power to the ladies moment.
As Jessica sat on her bedroom floor with her headphones on, listening to music, she noticed it too.
It felt like a tidal wave, but one that had been coming for a long time.
But many radio stations were still following an unofficial rule. You don't play songs by female artists back to back. Record labels would call radio stations to try to get female artists added to airplay.
And they'd be like, no, we already have Sheryl Crow. We don't have room for another woman.
And that's not the only place where women were being left out.
You would see these massive summer festivals with like 4 headliners, which were men, and then the rest of like the B and C stages were also mostly men, and then maybe there was a female act here there. Horde Festival, Lollapalooza, they're so testosterone heavy, and they would put like the token female on the bill, and that was that.
So in the summer of 96, while female athletes were taking the spotlight in Atlanta, singer-songwriter Sarah McLachlan staged a handful of shows with all female performers.
And it was really successful. And then in 1997, you saw the launch of what we now know as Lilith Fair, which was a first of its kind festival that featured all women on the bill, A, B, and C stages.
For her birthday that year, Jessica begged her dad to take her to Lilith Fair. She was 14.
This is all I want for my birthday. I will die if I do not go. And I remember Liz Phair coming out and taking the stage. I remember Chrissy Hine and the Pretenders performing. I remember Natalie Merchant swinging on something that was draped in ivy. I was so confused about what was happening, but I loved every minute.
Jessica remembers being surrounded by people who looked like her, felt like her. Just like watching the women's teams compete at the Olympics, Lilith Fair helped Jessica see possibilities for her own life.
That generation of women really helped propel a wave of what is called girl power, but really a wave of female empowerment and like culturally in the zeitgeist we hadn't seen before.
When Carrie Strug landed that vault in the women's gymnastics team final, 44 million Americans were watching on TV. But when the U.S. faced China in the women's soccer final, NBC did not even air the whole game.
So yeah, that was frustrating. And we felt like, oh, wow, what?
That's Julie Foudy. She played on the women's soccer team from 1987 to 2004.
Here you have this opportunity in front of your own country to showcase what we felt was something that was really special. If only people got to know these players as role models and people, then they're going to love this team.
Just a few years later, women's soccer would get that opportunity, and it would come directly from the success of the '96 Olympics. The U.S. was scheduled to host the 1999 Women's World Cup. It was planned for small stadiums, just on the East Coast. But when a record 76,000 fans showed up for the Olympic final, U.S. Soccer came up with a new plan to put the women in bigger stadiums all across the country.
And FIFA, of course, said no, because why would we put women in big stadiums nationally? And they had to actually convince them by saying, we will assume all losses and risks, and we're doing it. And so FIFA eventually said yes.
So by the time the Women's World Cup came along, we were in Soldier Field in Chicago at the Rose Bowl.
That's goalkeeper Briana Scurry. She joined the team in 1994.
So it went from, 5 to 10,000 to 60, 65, 70,000, 90,000.
The first game was held in Giant Stadium in New Jersey,
where we had an expectation, I believe, of 78,000 people, which was only bested by the Pope when he was there before. So we were like, woo, it's the Pope and us. This is good company to be in.
The players boarded the team bus 3 hours before game time. A police escort led them down the shoulder of the New Jersey Turnpike
to try to get to the game in time, because you got to be there 90 minutes beforehand. And we were a little bit concerned because it was really trafficky. We were wondering what had happened if there was an accident or another event going on in the same area. And then we realized that they were little girls in the cars, that their faces painted and the car windows painted and little flags, and they were honking, and they were there for us.
The players started waving and taking pictures of the kids. The kids waved back and took pictures too.
We took such pride in knowing we are role models for these young girls and young boys that they've never seen before, and how awesome for a young girl to look and say, I could actually do that. She came up through the same channels, she played on the same teams. That's really cool. That dream of mine isn't so unrealistic.
Once they finally arrived at Giant Stadium for the game, the U.S. marched in and beat Denmark 3-0.
This is the part that is just so stinking cool to me.
Journalist Mollyanity again.
They weren't just putting on their ponytails and smiling with kids. They were turning around the exact same day and destroying opponents. They were so good.
That summer, Molly was working for the WNBA, but she kept an eye on the Women's World Cup. The final was scheduled for July 10th in the Rose Bowl. More than 90,000 people would attend. But Molly had somewhere else to be that day. Lilith Fair.
This might be embarrassing, but I went to 3 in a row, and every single one was sold out.
Molly and her friends had a lot to celebrate that day. The all-female lineup, the Women's World Cup final, and it also happened to be Molly's 25th birthday.
And I was going to have to leave the concert early that night to catch a flight the next morning to go to the first WNBA All-Star game.
It is still scoreless here. The USA and China giving it their all in the World Cup final.
While 18 million people watched the game on TV, Molly and her friends were dancing and laughing and singing at the Gorge, a remote concert venue a couple of hours southeast of Seattle.
Now, very few people had cell phones, and we were not getting our news over our cell phones at this time.
But that doesn't mean Molly wasn't able to follow the game.
We were getting kind of updates through the crowd. Oh my gosh, it's still in a scoreless tie. Oh my gosh, they're going into extra time, and then, it's a shootout.
As soon as they heard that news, Molly and her friends hopped up from their spot on the hillside and ran to the beer garden.
And I don't know if we thought there was a radio or information was being beamed down from the sky. I don't remember, but we ran to the beer garden right as people erupted. We won. Brandy Chastain made the shot. And it was a celebration. The rest of the night were like, USA, USA, in between the sets.
But Molly's 25th birthday celebration wasn't over yet, because remember, she had to leave the concert early to fly to New York.
So it didn't quit. We got to the WNBA All-Star game, and it was at Madison Square Garden that first year. So it was this week of women's empowerment that didn't stop. And it was a blast. It was so fun.
Women were in the spotlight. It wasn't a blip. It was not an anomaly. And it had all started in the Summer of Gold.
The 1996 Summer Olympics, without question, made that week happen. It made that week happen.
Getting to that moment, it hadn't been easy. And women of those games were told no many times before they ever heard the word yes. Coming up on Summer of Gold.
My whole life, it's been too bad you're born a girl and good at sports, right?
And then Mrs. Erickson goes, girls can't play football. They can't play in the NFL. And I was like, well, yes, they can.
And then in practically the same breath, he said, well, we're going to have to cut your hair really short and give you a boy's name. We're going to call you Bob.
We had to convince people that this was a sport that's valuable, that you should spend money on, that you should spend broadcast rights fees on, that you should spend sponsorship dollars on.
I've been waiting my whole life for this, and I was going to live every single moment.
Summer of Gold is a Dear Media and Together production. If you like our show, please give us a 5-star rating and review. And don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening right now. We've got a Spotify playlist with tons of our favorite songs from the 90s. You can find the link in the show notes, so make sure you check it out. Summer of Gold is hosted by me, Michelle Kwan. It's written and reported by Karen Given. Producer is Asil Kibbe. Fact-checking by Emily Ann Vaughn. Production assistance by Daniel Gonzalez. Tina Toby Mack is our sound designer and mix engineer. Original music by Andrew Epen. Executive producers are Alex Morgan, Sue Bird, and Jessica Robertson from Together, along with Jocelyn Falk from Dear Media and Jeff Berman on behalf of both Dear Media and Together. Michael Bostic is the founder and CEO of Dear Media.